mentioned to me he was so happy that the reading was out of the New Testament, and not out of some of those Deuteronomical passages that I choose every now and then, just because it has huge names, and I love to hear people try to pronounce those things. But anyway, in looking at Hebrews 11, Hebrews 11 is a hall of faith. We know that Hebrews 11 gives us a long list of individuals who have faith. And so one would expect to find considerable information about faith in this context. And so what I want to look at and dissect is just 2 or 3 verses here that tell us something about faith. In fact, the reason I would want to expound on these is because very often, and we're studying this in our Wednesday night class, and we'll be going in depth into that, but one of the reasons is when our neighbors and our friends who are religious folk and very sincere talk about faith, their concept of faith is considerably different. Where it comes from, what it does, how it reacts with us. And so I want to look at just a few verses here. In fact, it's kind of fascinating because you can go through this entire chapter, and I have. And it's kind of neat because nearly every name on in this list of individuals who by faith did something, every one of them has definitions that you can extrapolate from the text of what they did, and it explains faith and how we respond in faith. But you'll notice it said by faith Moses. Okay, we're talking about Moses. We all understand who Moses was. But it says in the very next phrase, when he became of age. Well, here's one of the anomalies that you find when Jesus makes the statement in Mark 16:16, he who believes and is baptized shall be saved. Well, there's a chronology that breaks out there. You believe and then you're baptized. You cannot be baptized before you believe, by virtue of the fact that faith involves the ratiocination, the reasoning process, in order to understand what you're doing. Water's water. Getting dunked in water has no mythical or mystical value. It's what you know when you get in the water. But you have to know that before you get in the water. And so what we understand here by faith Moses, when he became of age, tells us when faith has its opportunity to be acquired by an individual. A person cannot have faith until they become of age. Now there's a lot of ways you can expand that phrase, but we're talking about someone who has the capacity to understand abstract thought, because faith is very abstract in its nature. And so therefore we're talking about someone who is matured to the point that they can understand what they're doing in a sense that matters. And very often it is the case, and I'm visiting with a guy right now about visiting a person right now who is in Colorado, and the person is very ill, but they have the mentality of a 2-year-old. They're an aged person, 40-something years old, but they have the mentality of a 2-year-old. 2-year-olds don't understand faith. They don't understand sin. They don't understand even love. Now, they can see it manifested and appreciate it very often. But at 2 years old, even then, they don't understand love well enough to appreciate it when someone disciplines them and because they love them, don't want them to be harmed, and says, no. You know, I don't know about you, but every kid I've ever met just loves to hear no. No, they don't. And that's because they're not old enough to understand abstract thought and the concept of love. By the way, that does speak spiritually volumes of those who refuse to accept the chastisement of the Lord, does it not? Is not that an indicator of their spiritual maturity when you're corrected that you don't want to hear it? And so therefore, there's a good analogy between the two. But he could have faith when he became of age. Before he became of age, he could not have faith. Further on, it says he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. There are 2 statements here in verse 25, choosing rather. He refused and he chose rather. There is a product that faith produces. That sounds like a redundancy, I guess, but there is something that is produced by faith. And it has to do with the manifestation of faith. James spends the whole 2nd chapter talking about faith without works and how it's dead. It's vain. It's useless. Even the devils believe and tremble. So therefore, faith is manifested through our works. Well, here we see that Moses became of age, and now he's ready to acquire faith. And in that faith, there is a manifestation of that faith. And one was, He refused something. There is a discipline that's involved in refusal. And we'll talk about two things he refused. One, the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and the other, the treasures of Egypt. But when you talk about the fact that an individual has faith and it motivates you to do something, if your faith is not motivating you to act, it's a dead faith. People say all the time, I believe, yeah, I believe that. In fact, there's a very sarcastic tone you can use sometimes when you say that. Somebody tells you something, you go, yeah, I believe that. You know, the tone of voice tells people that, yeah, you don't really believe that. And so therefore, when somebody does believe something, there is a conduct, there is conviction that follows this. And that's what we see here. Faith, true faith, the way the Bible uses it, causes us to be convicted to act. And so therefore, in the negative, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. In fact, on the positive, he chose rather to suffer affliction. Now those are two really interesting things. One, the first one, he refused to be called son of Pharaoh's daughter. Over in verse 26, he esteemed the reproach of Christ greater than the treasures in Egypt. I think contextually we lose something if we don't go back and understand where Egypt was during the time of Pharaoh that Moses knew, being Pharaoh's daughter. Egypt run the world. Egypt was like Rome at that time, as Rome was during the time when Christ was born. They ran everything. Egypt was a very civilized society, as civilizations go. They're a very knowledgeable society. They had a very complex language. They understood astronomy and things of difficulty in mathematics. People are still wondering exactly how it is that they could have built the pyramids the way they did. Phenomenal thing, this wonder of the world, these pyramids. But they have the mathematical knowledge, to understand how to erect a structure like that and have it sustained all these hundreds and thousands of years. Okay, they're a wonderful culture. And what did Moses choose to do in leaving that? Well, he left, number one, the son of Pharaoh's daughter, a position of prestige. You know, I know it's very difficult, and we find our politicians being susceptible to that, but you know, preachers get stuck in that too. In fact, it was a neat entrance into this kind of thought this morning when Boyce made the comment, you know, some people think highly of themselves, and when they do, they get too big for their britches, and the idea is you think you really are a good guy, and you're not. All of sin falls short of the glory of God. And so it's hard to turn away a position where people think you're great and maybe assign you greatness just because of who you're kin. It's not who you know. I mean, it's not who you are, it's who you know. And so if you're connected with somebody way up, what Moses let go was a high position of prestige and a very advanced civilization. And of course, he went off herded sheep down the desert after that. You know, that looks like a step down, but in actuality, it was a step up in God's service when he came across the bush that wouldn't go, that was on fire, it wouldn't burn out. But also in verse 26, he esteemed the reproach of Christ greater than the riches, greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. At this time, being the premier culture of the era, they were really, really rich. Okay, not quite as rich as Solomon was at one time, and we have great descriptions of Solomon's riches, but certainly they were very, very wealthy. I don't know countless times how many times people have compromised their Christianity because a dollar was involved. It's a sad state of affairs when we can't separate the two and realize that there is a choice to be made, and we need to refuse those temptations of life that are temporary. And so one of the things that we will manifest in our faith is putting faith first and everything else second. Prestige, money, on and on it goes. Those are secondary to our faith and the expression of our faith. Third thing to notice about faith is the fact that he chose the afflictions because he proclaimed his faith in God, as opposed to the passing pleasures of sin. I get tickled when I get in a high school class. One of the things that they're shocked about is a preacher sitting there and telling those kids, those high school kids, sin is fun. And they look at you like you're from another planet. We're in church. You're not supposed to be talking like that. No, that's what the Bible teaches. Don't ever deny, if you want your integrity and credibility to stand in tow, to young people when they talk about sin, and don't ever deny that it's not fun. It is fun. Satan is no fool. He wouldn't have an entourage if he didn't have something fun to do. If everything that Satan did, you can immediately see the consequences. My best example of this is the beer commercials on TV. You never see humongous, heavy, overset people whose livers are shot drinking booze. They're not going to sell booze that way. You see the nice, athletic, fit people who are all there. Same way with smoking. You know, for years, my hero was that cowboy that rode on the horse and smoked cigarettes and promoted tobacco products. Do you ever see the last one, the advertising that he did? He was sitting up there and looked like Ben with his oxygen tank on there, telling people, ooh, this was a mistake. Yeah, that wouldn't sell them very well, would it? Satan is no fool. Sin is fun. As a matter of fact, that's the odd thing about it, where you talk about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Those are all things they're big groupings of sin. Sin never loses its pleasure. I don't care what age you are. Maybe the lust of the flesh doesn't affect you much because you're a little older. Or the lust of the eyes. Maybe now you're into the stage where the pride of life is a problem. Let me tell you something. It's fun. It seems rewarding. It's something I want to pursue. But it's not good because it's sin. And yeah, it may be a pleasure for the moment, but the key word in this is passing. Translation of that is, it's temporary. Whatever pleasures you may derive from whatever is sin against God, unauthorized by God, it's temporary. And if you have faith, you will understand that the faith is what's going to endure to the end. Faith, hope, and love. That's what keeps us going. Now, granted, at the end of it all, we'll not need faith anymore, nor hope, because our hope will be realized, and our faith will be realized, and all that will remain in heaven as we spend eternity with God is love. That's going to endure. But for right now, faith is the only thing really you can hang on to. It is the source of our hope. And when faith is decimated and taken away, then the pleasures of sin will be so popular they will be hard not to get into. So therefore, when you're looking at what Moses did, faith is described and manifests several different things. Notice too, the last phrase there, it talks about the reproach of Christ was greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. Faith is far reaching, it's far looking, it looks way ahead. Faith doesn't look at just the moment, because the moment will pass quickly. Faith looks way beyond that. In fact, you go to the end phrase, for he looked to the reward. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. He who comes to God must believe that he is, and the rewarder of those who look to seek. So if we believe the Hebrews writer, and we understand what faith is, then we're going to pass up this momentary pleasure and look at the long run, the end game, what's going to be the conclusion of the matter, that we may stand before the judgment seat of Christ and say, Lord, I have served you all my life. I've done the best I could. In all my flaws, his grace will save us, but in all my flaws, I've done the best I could with what I have, because I did believe. Faith is not just a feeling. It's something that is manifested in how we act and how we choose to live our life. You have a choice that's coming up as we sing an invitation song. You have a choice to get your life right. If it's not, we encourage you to do that.